Aisha?
Yes, ma'am. I removed one of your account.
Okay. Okay. Students, today's topic is mitral stenosis. I think most of you will be aware of this mitral stenosis in your clinical classes. So, uh, we'll see the theoretical part of mitral stenosis today. So, what is mitral stenosis? So, it is characterized by obstruction to left ventricular inflow. So, inflow of blood from left atrium to left ventricle is obstructed. It is at the level of mitral valve. It is due to structural abnormality of mitral valve apparatus. So, I think you can follow me. Can you follow me, Aisha?
Yes, ma'am. It's clear, ma'am.
So there is obstruction to left ventricular inflow at the level of mitral valve due to structural abnormality of mitral valve apparatus. So most common cause is rheumatic fever. I believe you will be aware of rheumatic fever. It is a autoimmune inflammatory disorder which is after 2 to 3 weeks after group A beta hemolytic streptococcal infection. So there is formation of autoantibodies which reacts against our valves and joint tissues. So it is rheumatic fever. So the most common cause of mitral stenosis will be rheumatic fever. So what is Lutem-Backer syndrome? It is AST with rheumatic mitral stenosis. AST with mitral stenosis, which is due to rheumatic origin, is called Lutem-Backer syndrome. So rheumatic mitral stenosis with atrial septal defect. It is a syndrome called Lutem-Backer syndrome. So what are the causes of mitral stenosis? There are 4 causes. The most common cause will be, as I already told, it is rheumatic fever. So this is the most common cause. The other causes are very less encountered. The next one will be congenital cause. Next will be severe mitral annular calcification. The others will be due to connective tissue disorders like SLE and rheumatoid arthritis. Next is the pathophysiology behind mitral stenosis. So, what is a normal mitral valve orifice? It is 4 to 6 centimeters square. So, when the area is reduced to less than 2 centimeters square, so the blood can flow from LA to LV only by abnormally elevated left atrioventricular pressure gradient. The pressure gradient between the left atrium and ventricle has to be increased to such a level to push the blood from left atrium to ventricle. So it occurs when the valve area is reduced to less than 2 centimeters square. So it is called mitral stenosis. So there is so because of this elevation of left atrial pressure, there will be elevation of pulmonary venous and pulmonary arterial wedge pressure. So the pulmonary veins which will be draining into the left atrium, which will drain the purified blood into the left atrium. So this oxygenated blood will be flowing to left atrium through the pulmonary veins. So whenever there is elevation of left atrial pressure, there will be elevation of pulmonary venous pressure through the backflow of pressure, and there will be so secondary to this elevation of pulmonary venous pressure, there will be elevation of pulmonary arterial wedge pressure. So there will be reduced pulmonary compliance. So it leads to exertional dyspnea. So because of pulmonary arterial wedge pressure increase secondary to pulmonary venous pressure elevation. So there will be in a case of in a patient who is presenting with atrial fibrillation, there will be increase in heart rate. So what happens when there is increase in heart rate? So usually increased heart rate shortens the diastole more than the systole. So systole is more important, more needed than the diastole. So the diastole is shortened than the systole. So there is mitral stenosis. So there is reduced flow of blood from left atrium to left ventricle. So the heart has to increase the pressure gradient across the mitral valve to push the blood from left atrium to left ventricle. So already there is a problem. There is increase in heart rate also. So what happens is that diastole is shortened because of increased heart rate. So there will be already there is a difficulty in flow of blood. So it will further diminishes the time available for flow of blood from left atrium to left ventricle. So whenever there is increase in heart rate, like any arrhythmias like atrial fibrillation, which is very common in mitral stenosis, there will be difficulty in flow of blood from left atrium to left ventricle. So what happens? Finally, the cardiac output will be decreased. So the patient will have dyspnea. And also the left atrial pressure will elevate more, that will cause back pressure, which increases the pulmonary venous pressure and pulmonary arterial wedge pressure. So automatically there will be pulmonary congestion. So there will be exertional dyspnea. This is the basic pathophysiology behind the mitral stenosis. So can you all follow me? Aisha?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So what happens in rapid AF, atrial fibrillation? So there will be increase in transvalvular pressure gradient. So further elevation of LA pressure, and further there will be increase in pulmonary arterial wedge pressure. So pulmonary congestion and exertional and dyspnea. This is called pulmonary edema and dyspnea at rest. So in severe mitral stenosis, the valve orifice will be less 1 to 1.5 centimeters square. So according to Harrison, this will be the value. In severe mitral stenosis, the valve orifice will be 1 to 1.5 centimeters square. So normal valve orifice is 4 to 6 centimeters square. In severe cases, there will be 1.5 to 1 centimeter square. So in very severe mitral stenosis, the valve area will be less than 1 centimeter square. So less than 1 is very, very severe mitral stenosis. So this is a pathophysiology behind this mitral stenosis. So what is pulmonary hypertension? So pulmonary hypertension is an important complication which leads to this dyspnea and other complications of mitral stenosis. So there is, as I already told, there will be passive backward transmission of elevated LA pressure. The elevated LA pressure is the basic phenomenon which causes all the complications of this mitral stenosis. So elevated LA pressure, which cause passive backward transmission of this pressure, will cause elevated pulmonary venous pressure, pulmonary arterial wedge pressure. So this will lead to pulmonary arteriolar constriction. So it is also called as second stenosis. Pulmonary arteriolar constriction is also called as second stenosis. So this is actually triggered by pulmonary venous hypertension, which is called reactive pulmonary hypertension. So this pulmonary hypertension is called reactive pulmonary hypertension, which is secondary to pulmonary venous hypertension, and secondary to that there will be pulmonary arteriolar constriction, which causes pulmonary hypertension. So pulmonary hypertension is a increased pressure in pulmonary arteries, not in pulmonary veins. So pulmonary arterial hypertension, which happens secondary to this elevated left atrial pressure and elevated pulmonary venous pressure. Then finally there will be pulmonary arteriolar constriction, which will lead to pulmonary arterial hypertension. Pulmonary arterial hypertension is what is called pulmonary hypertension. It is not pulmonary venous hypertension, which is given the name as pulmonary hypertension. So there will be pulmonary arterial hypertension secondary to mitral stenosis. So this is the cause for the dyspnea which the patient is presenting with. So there will be interstitial edema because from the walls of small pulmonary vessels. So there will be organic obliterative changes in the pulmonary vascular bed, which is an irreversible change. And finally, what happens is, because of this severe pulmonary hypertension, what I told, pulmonary arterial hypertension, so which leads to right ventricular enlargement. So there will be this pressure will cause secondary changes in the right side of the heart, right ventricular enlargement. And secondary, what happens when there is right ventricular enlargement? The right ventricle enlarges or dilates. So automatically the tricuspid valve will also get dilated. So there is secondary tricuspid regurgitation. So it is secondary to the right ventricular enlargement. There is secondary tricuspid regurgitation. So it is not a primary one like our mitral stenosis, which is due to rheumatic etiology. Okay. So what happens is there is involvement of left atrium. That is the first chamber involved. Secondary to that, pulmonary venous hypertension. Then secondary to that, there will be pulmonary arterial hypertension, which will lead to right ventricular hypertrophy. So from there the pulmonary veins, pulmonary artery arises from right ventricle. So there will be pulmonary in right ventricular enlargement. So then there will be secondary tricuspid regurgitation and pulmonary regurgitation. So what are the symptoms? So you will be knowing about the symptoms. I don't have to tell much about symptoms of mitral stenosis. So there will be exertional dyspnea. So what are the precipitating factors for this exertional dyspnea? So any sudden change in heart rate. So the same thing will be repeated again and again. If you understand this, there is no need to study this mitral stenosis in the textbooks. So there is sudden change in the heart rate. So I told when there is atrial fibrillation, there will be increased heart rate. So there will be the time period of diastole will be reduced. So the venous return, the ventricular flow will be reduced, and elevated LA pressure. Everything will finally leads to pulmonary congestion and exertional dyspnea. So any change in heart rate, any change in volume status, then anything leads to increase in left atrial pressure. So what are the conditions which leads to increased LA pressure? So any patients who is having exertion, excitement, fever, severe anemia, paroxysmal AF, pregnancy, thyrotoxicosis, all the conditions will lead to increased cardiac output. So whenever there is increased cardiac output, there will be increased LA pressure. So exertion, excitement, fever, severe anemia, paroxysmal atrial fibrillation, pregnancy, thyrotoxicosis. In all those conditions, there will be increase in cardiac output. There will be need of increased cardiac output. So whenever there is a need, there will be automatically there will be increased need of flow of blood from left atrium to left ventricle. So it will further increase the left atrial pressure. So finally, there will be exertional dyspnea, which is due to increased pulmonary arterial congestion, pulmonary arterial pressure and pulmonary congestion. So first one will be exertional dyspnea, then palpitations due to any arrhythmias, then hemoptysis. Hemoptysis is due to automatically there will be pulmonary congestion, which can also cause hemoptysis. In other way, there will be a rupture of pulmonary bronchial venous connections, which gets ruptured and can cause hemoptysis. Pulmonary bronchial venous connections. Then there will be pulmonary infarction. Due to what can cause pulmonary infarction? So whenever there is mitral stenosis, there is more chance of left atrial thrombus, which may lead to embolization to pulmonary vessels. So there will be pulmonary infarction, which may lead to hemoptysis. Then recurrent pulmonary infections. Why there is recurrent pulmonary infections in mitral stenosis? So automatically there is pulmonary congestion, which is due to increased left atrial pressure. So pulmonary congestion will be prone for pulmonary infections like acute bronchitis and other infections, which may lead to pulmonary this hemoptysis. So systemic embolization can occur in 10 to 20% of cases. So what are the symptoms? Exertional dyspnea, palpitations, then hemoptysis. Hemoptysis is one of the important symptoms. Then systemic embolization can occur, like in the form of cerebrovascular accidents and other DVT and other embolizations. So what are the signs? Molar flush with blue faces, prominent A wave in JVP. Why is there prominent A wave in JVP? What are the causes of prominent A wave in JVP?
Tricuspid regurgitation.
Any one of you? Tricuspid regurgitation. Is it regurgitation which cause prominent A wave in JVP? What is the cause for which one forms which cardiac cycle? Which part of the cardiac cycle forms the A wave?
Atrial contraction, ma'am.
Atrial contraction. So whenever there is a impedance to the atrial contraction, there is a difficulty in whenever there is a difficulty in atrial contraction, the A wave will be prominent. So what can cause the difficulty in atrial contraction? Is it tricuspid regurgitation or tricuspid stenosis?
Stenosis.
So it is tricuspid stenosis, but it is not there in this case. In the case of mitral stenosis, there is no tricuspid stenosis. So what could be the cause for prominent A wave in this mitral stenosis?
Pulmonary hypertension.
Pulmonary hypertension. So, what are the causes of prominent airway? Tricuspid stenosis, pulmonary stenosis, and pulmonary hypertension. So, here in this case, there is pulmonary hypertension which causes this prominent airway. Okay. So, you should know what is this. What is the cause of prominent airway? Then, in some cases, there will be absent airway. What could be the cause for absent airwaves? In
Atrial fibrillation.
Atrial fibrillation. So, okay. Then the another sign will be small volume pulse. Small volume pulse, it is due to the reduced cardiac output. So whenever there is a reduced inflow of blood into the left ventricle, it will lead to reduced cardiac output. So there will be small volume pulse. Left parasternal heave, it is due to right ventricular hypertrophy. So I told in the pathophysiology there is right ventricular hypertrophy, which is secondary to pulmonary arterial hypertension. So whenever there is pulmonary arterial hypertension, there will be there will be the increased load to the right ventricle. So whenever there is pulmonary arterial hypertension, there will be hypertrophy of right ventricle. So that leads to left parasternal heave. So if there is parasternal heave, it means the pressure has led to the failure of the right heart also. So it is in a severe stage of the mitral stenosis. So can I ask you one question? Any one of you answer. Which chamber is not at all involved in the case of mitral stenosis? Any one of you?
Left
Chamber
ventricle.
is not at all affected by this process of mitral stenosis, pathophysiology of mitral stenosis. So it is the left ventricle will not be affected. So even whenever there is an increased obstruction to the flow to the left ventricle, only the LA pressure is increased. Only the load to the left atrium is increased, not the load to the left ventricle. So left ventricle is not at all affected. Even even the left ventricular pressure or the volume, both are not increased. Left ventricular volume is also not increased. Left ventricular pressure is also not increased. So only the left atrium increased. First, the left atrium is affected. Left atrium is the most affected chamber. Then, because of the affection of the left atrium only, right atrium and right ventricle. Then after that, right atrium is involved. It's all because of the pressure overload. Okay. Next, apical impulse will be tapping in nature. What is the cause for what is tapping apical impulse? It is palpable. Palpable. Okay, then the P2 will be palpated. P2 is palpable, which is due to pulmonary hypertension. Then there is diastolic thrill over the mitral area. So it is a diastolic murmur, we know. So there will be a diastolic thrill over the mitral area. So loud S1 and opening snap. What is the cause for opening snap? So it will be, it could have been discussed in clinical classes. What is the cause for loud S1? So the valve, because of the valve stenosis, to compensate that, the valve opens widely to increase the flow of blood through the mitral valve. The valve opens widely, which is accelerated by the increased left atrial pressure. So this pressure gradient increases the pressure across the valve. So the valve opens widely and then closes sharply. So this will be the cause for loud S1 and opening snap. So the murmur will be low pitched, rough, rumbling. So everything is due to the pressure gradient. This increased left atrial pressure will be the culprit of all the complications and all the signs behind this mitral stenosis. So low pitched, rough, rumbling MDM mid-diastolic murmur with pre-systolic accentuation. So you will be very clear about this murmur. So best heard over the apex with the bell of the stethoscope in left lateral position in expiration. So how will you assess the severity? It is very difficult to assess the A to OS interval in clinical settings. So normal A to OS interval is 0.05 to 0.12 seconds. It is shortened in severe mitral stenosis. So what is the valve gradient across the stenotic valve? So in severe MS, I think it is more than 25 millimeters of mercury. So valve gradient across the stenotic valve will be more than 25 millimeters of mercury in severe MS. So severity is assessed. One is if the intensity of murmur is more, so severity is more. Then the A to OS interval. If it is more than 0.12 seconds, no, it is shortened in severe MS. If it is less than 0.05 seconds, it is severe MS. So normally is 0.05 to 0.12 seconds. Then valve gradient across the stenotic valve. If it is more than 25 millimeters of mercury, it is severe MS. So according to A to OS interval and valve gradient, we are assessing the severity of the mitral stenosis. So what are the complications of mitral stenosis? First one will be hemoptysis. So it is due to increased. What are the causes of hemoptysis? One is due to pulmonary hypertension, then pulmonary congestion, then pulmonary infarction, recurrent pulmonary infections. So I have already discussed. Then atrial fibrillation. So increasing. So it is due to the dilated left atrium, which is left atrial appendage will be the foci of the origin of atrial fibrillation. So atrial fibrillation, if there is a left atrial thrombus, it will lead to embolization. So this is a complication of atrial fibrillation. Then atrial fibrillation are the cases in if the rate is very high, if it is around more than 150, if the heart rate is more than 150, patient may go in for decreased cardiac output and shock. So then will be the next will be pulmonary edema. So this we know the pathophysiology between pulmonary edema we have already discussed. Then will be infective endocarditis. So any valve damaged, it's prone for infective endocarditis. Then the other less common complications will be compression of left recurrent laryngeal nerve by enlarged left atrium, which is also called Ortner's syndrome. Next will be pressure on left main bronchus, then erosion of spine by the elevated enlarged left atrium. So everything is because of this left atrium. So what is the differential? What are the differential diagnosis? So differential diagnosis is the same pathophysiology. There is a decreased or impedance to the flow of blood from left atrium to left ventricle. So what are the other causes? Other things which can cause this obstruction. One is left atrial myxoma. So there is a tumor or mass inside the left atrium, so which can obstruct the mitral valve. So there is same mechanism. So that could be a differential diagnosis. The next will be car triatriatum. Then ball valve thrombus, which will also obstruct the mitral valve orifice. Then what is Austin Flint murmur? Okay, go and refer. Okay, investigations. First, in all cardiac patients, we do ECG. What will be seen in ECG? P mitral. What is P mitral? So, what will be the morphology of P wave? Is it all peaked or it is a wide P wave? Aisha? Is it a tall peaked P wave or wide P wave? P mitral is it's a wide P wave. The diameter of P wave is more than 2.5 mm. So this P mitral is due to left atrial enlargement. So that will be reflected in ECG. So other thing we can see in ECG will be atrial fibrillation. What are the signs of ECG? ECG features of atrial fibrillation. Any one of you? How will be the P wave? The P wave will be absent. The rhythm will be irregularly irregular. So we can find out in ECG. Chest X-ray. So chest X-ray also we will see only the left atrial enlargement. So what will be seen in a chest X-ray? It is also called as shadow within shadow appearance. So which chamber which form the right heart border? Can any one of you say which chamber which normally form the right heart border? Are you online? Are you connected? Okay. So normally it will be the right atrium. So when the left atrium is enlarged, the left atrium will be seen. The shadow of left atrium will be seen inside the shadow of right atrium. This is what is called a shadow within shadow. So left atrium normally left atrium will not be seen behind right atrium, but it will be seen behind right atrium as a shadow within shadow appearance. So that is called left atrial enlargement appearance in chest X-ray. Then straightening of left heart border. So normally left heart border is formed by aortic knuckle, then pulmonary bay. Pulmonary bay will be a depression on the right heart border. Then will be the left ventricle. So here there will be prominent pulmonary artery. So pulmonary bay is obliterated. Normally pulmonary bay will be a depression. Here pulmonary bay is enlarged due to prominent pulmonary artery. So there is pulmonary artery hypertension. So obviously pulmonary bay will be obliterated. Then left atrial appendage is enlarged. So normally aortic knuckle is seen prominently. Now up to that point, this left atrial appendage is enlarged and pulmonary artery is also enlarged. There will be straightening of left heart border. This is what is called straightening of left heart border. So first sign will be left atrial enlargement, which is seen behind right atrium as a shadow within shadow appearance. Next will be straightening of left heart border. You will be asked all these questions in clinical exams. It is very important for UGs and also for PGs. So this is the basic. It will be asked in clinical exam. So you should understand. Only if you understand, you can remember and answer. Otherwise, you will forget. If you just memorize the shadow within shadow and from straightening of left heart border, now you will forget everything. So, can you able to understand? Are you able to understand, Pa? Are you connected?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So, is it audible, Ma?
Yes, ma'am. It's audible.
Okay. So, first one is shadow within shadow. Next will be straightening of left heart border. So normally left heart border is formed by aortic knuckle, which will be seen prominently, followed by the depression caused by pulmonary bay. Pulmonary bay, it is a depression. Now the pulmonary bay is filled with enlarged pulmonary artery and left atrial appendage, which also will seen prominently. So the left heart border is straightened. Then the next will be the mitral valve calcification, which is seen in severe cases in last stages. Then next will be curly B lines and curly A lines, which is due to pulmonary congestion. Nothing but the pulmonary congestion which caused these lines. Curly B line, B is for base, so it will be seen in the base of the lungs, horizontal lines of pulmonary congestion. So it will be around 4 centimeters in length. And dense lines, horizontal lines is B for base. A lines will be around the A lines will be seen in the upper or middle part of the lungs, which will be straight lines, okay? Straight and long lines, which is also due to pulmonary congestions. Then in the echo, we can see thickened cusps and the valve area can be measured in echo. Then there will be the rate of the diastolic filling, that is the flow of blood through the valve, can be measured in echo. So the other investigation which has to be done in mitral stenosis cases will be cardiac catheterization. So in patients with age more than 40, in case of males and more than 45 years in case of females has to undergo coronary angiogram to rule out any obstruction in the coronary vessels. So when we do this any procedure for this mitral valve, we can include this angioplasty also along with that procedure. So what will be the treatment? So the first one will be medical management. So there is a pulmonary congestion, so we go for anti-failure measures in the form of diuretics and other drugs for cardiac remodeling like AC inhibitors. Then next will be anticoagulation. Any case of any valvular heart disease, mitral stenosis with atrial fibrillation, we have to start them on anticoagulation to prevent any embolization. And not only the cases of LA thrombus, any case of mitral stenosis with atrial fibrillation, you have to go for anticoagulation. Then other drugs for the rate control in the case of atrial fibrillation. In atrial fibrillation, the rates will be more than 150 to 200. So we have to go for beta blockers. Then non-dihydropyridine calcium channel blockers. What are they? Verapamil and diltiazem. Then other drug will be digoxin. These are the three drugs used for rate control in the case of atrial fibrillation. Beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, digoxin. Then other will be rheumatic fever prophylaxis and infective endocarditis prophylaxis. So we'll see in another next slide. So rheumatic fever prophylaxis. So what is the duration of rheumatic fever? Duration of antibiotic coverage needed in a case of rheumatic fever. So in a patient with rheumatic fever without carditis. So there is a typical case of rheumatic fever, but there is no carditis. So we don't need to have carditis in all cases of rheumatic fever. So to diagnose rheumatic fever, we have a major criteria and a minor criteria. So we need one major and two minor, 2 or 3, and essential criteria. So if we have polyarthritis, it is enough. No need of carditis. So if there is no carditis also, if there is no carditis in the case of rheumatic fever, we give antibiotic prophylaxis for 5 years after the last attack or up to 21 years of age, whichever is longer. So minimum 5 years is needed. So then next will be the rheumatic fever with carditis. So what are the features of carditis in the case of rheumatic fever? First you should know what is carditis. What are the features of carditis? So pericarditis, endocarditis, myocarditis. In endocarditis, there will be what is the murmur seen in rheumatic heart carditis? What it is called? So go and study about rheumatic fever. So what is carditis? So what are the features of pericarditis? So will be seen. We will have pericardial rub and pericardial infusion. In myocarditis, you will have tachycardia. In endocarditis, you will have murmur of mitral regurgitation. Okay, changing murmur. We also call it as changing. Changing. It's not a changing murmur. So you will have murmur of mitral regurgitation. Okay. Then, so in those cases, if there is carditis but no residual valvular heart disease, so there will be a temporary carditis. Only during acute rheumatic fever, patient will have features of MR. Then the murmur, there is no damage to the valve. Then we can give the antibiotic prophylaxis for 10 years at least, minimum of 10 years or up to the 21 years of age. So whichever is longer. Then if there is rheumatic fever with persistent valvular disease, there is a damage to valve and that mitral stenosis or mitral regurgitation on echocardiography or clinical settings. So we go for 10 years after the last attack or up to 40 years of age. whichever is longer. So it depends on the age of the patient. Aisha,
Yes, ma'am.
how many major criteria, how many minor criteria are needed to diagnose rheumatic fever? Go on study, okay?
Okay, ma'am.
Next will be what is the antibiotic prophylaxis for endocarditis. So standard regimen will be amoxicillin. If the patient is not able to take oral medication, we go for ampicillin 2 gram IV or IM before 1 hour before the procedure. So oral regimen will be amoxicillin 2 gram per oral 1 hour before the procedure. So if couldn't take oral medication, we go for ampicillin 2 gram IV or both are 2 grams only. 2 grams IV or IM 1 hour before the procedure. If they are allergic to penicillin, we go for clarithromycin, erythromycin, cephalexin, clindamycin, and in injection form ceftriaxone, clindamycin. So antibiotic choice will be penicillin. So not in all cases of this rheumatic heart disease, we give endocarditis prophylaxis. Only if the patient has prosthetic heart valves, we go for endocarditis prophylaxis. It is not needed to give in all cardiac valvular diseases. We should give endocarditis. We should give endocarditis prophylaxis. So in any congenital heart diseases, so I'll share the PowerPoint to you. Give it to everyone. Okay, it will be useful.
Okay,
So I'll read it out. First in prosthetic heart valves. So in the case of mitral stenosis, if the patient has a prosthetic heart valve, we go for endocarditis prophylaxis. Next, if there is prior endocarditis, history of prior endocarditis. Next, if there is unrepaired cyanotic congenital heart disease, then completely repaired congenital heart defects during 6 months after repair. Then incompletely repaired congenital heart disease. So only in case of congenital heart disease, we are going for endocarditis prophylaxis very often. Okay. Then valvulopathy developing after cardiac transplantation. Only in these cases. So in mitral valve disease, we give only if there is prosthetic heart valves or if there is prior history of endocarditis. Not in all the cases before dental procedures, we should go for endocarditis prophylaxis. That's the point I wanted to convey. Next, what is surgical treatment? So it will be like a mitral valvotomy. Mitral valvotomy is divided into two types. One is percutaneous mitral balloon valvotomy. Next will be surgical valvotomy. So percutaneous is through cutaneous catheters introduced to the left atrium. So I will tell the procedure. Then next will be surgical valvotomy. We have to do it open heart surgery. Through open heart surgery, surgical valvotomy. So nowadays the percutaneous mitral balloon valvotomy, PMVV, percutaneous mitral balloon valvotomy is most commonly encountered. So what are the indications? So any case with NYHA class 2 to 4, and if the valve area is less than 1.5, it is in the case of severe mitral stenosis. I told 1 to 1.5 centimeter square is severe. So according to Harrison, not according to Alagappan. Okay, so according to Harrison, it is less than 1.5 to 1. It is severe. So we should go for surgery. So what is the procedure for percutaneous mitral balloon valvotomy? First, a catheter is directed to left atrium after transeptal puncture. So first it is inserted into right heart. Any catheter has to be inserted, can be inserted only to the right heart, no, through veins. So venous drainage is to right heart. So first right atrium is entered. Then after transeptal puncture, atrial septum is punctured and the catheter is now inserted into left atrium. Now a balloon at the tip of the catheter is directed across the mitral valve. Then it is inflated. This is the procedure of percutaneous mitral balloon valvotomy. So there is no need for cardiopulmonary bypass. So we can do it without cardiopulmonary bypass. So it is done in the cases of isolated MS. Only isolated MS cases can go for this PMVV, not in all the cases. If there is associated mitral regurgitation, we cannot go for this procedure. Then another will be mobile and non-calcified valve. The valve should not get calcified. Then the subvalvular apparatus should be not damaged. It is mobile. Only then we can go for this PMBB. So the left atrium should be free of thrombus. So these 3 points should be fulfilled to go for PMBB. So we should rule out left atrial thrombus. There should not be any damage or calcification of valve or subvalvular apparatus. What are the subvalvular apparatus? Cardiotendinae and papillary muscles. There should not be any calcification. If there is a calcification, there is no use of doing this percutaneous mitral balloon valvotomy. Then there should not be any mitral regurgitation. When there is regurgitation, we cannot open the valve through this balloon, through this balloon. Okay. So another one will be open valvotomy. Open valvotomy should be done whenever these criteria are not fulfilled. We go for open mitral valvotomy. Previous slide. Then, so this open mitral valvotomy is done with the help of cardiopulmonary bypass. Okay. So during open mitral valvotomy, we should loosen the subvalvular fusion and we should remove the calcium deposit. So all those things could not be done in percutaneous procedure. That's why we are going for this open mitral valvotomy. So subvalvular fusion should be relieved and any calcium deposit should be removed. The next will be the last part of treatment will be. There is a problem with my laptop now. So if there is significant associated mitral regurgitation, then we should go for mitral valve replacement. So it is necessary to mitral valve replacement if there is associated mitral regurgitation. So if there is associated mitral regurgitation, we should only go for mitral valve replacement, not any corrections like valvotomy. So the overall survival rate is 70%. 10-year survival rate is 70%. So we give or we replace mechanical valves in young patients. So young patients, and there should not be any contraindications for anticoagulation also. So whenever we replace the mechanical valves, we should go for lifelong anticoagulation. So the patient should not have any contraindication for anticoagulation, and it is preferable for young patients. So because mechanical valves have long half-life. So next will be the bioprosthetic valves. In bioprosthetic valves, there is no need for anticoagulation. So mechanical valves will be metal valves. So we need to anticoagulate the patient, but the life of the valve will be more. Durability is more in mechanical valves. But in bioprosthetic valves, the durability is less. So it is preferred in elderly patients. So there is no need of anticoagulation also. So in elderly patients, if we could not anticoagulate the patient, should go for bioprosthetic valve, but the durability is less. In mechanical valves, we go in patients, in young patients, and we should give lifelong anticoagulation. So this is mitral valve replacement. So replacement is done if there is associated mitral regurgitation and also other contraindications like LA thrombus, subvalvular fusion, and calcium deposition. If all the complications can also be corrected through this mitral valve replacement. So have you all understood? Aisha?
Yes, ma'am.
I will send the PPT to you. Actually, I don't have it in my mobile. That's why